Welcome everybody to this session on using Google Slides, or more actively really adding some punch and some vigor to your presentation that exists inside your courses. That could be coming from your textbook manufacturer or from yourself, but kind of adding that piece that makes them much more interactive. And so the question that I had added right there into the description originally was, how do everyone use slides? So when you add slide decks into your courses, what are some of the ways that you expect your students to interact with these components? Anybody can call it out. This is the free discussion part of the session.
I use it in my computerized accounting class to kind of see, this is what we're going to do in the chapter, and then I talk about the chapter, kind of get them, used to a little bit what's going on, because I don't like to page through the textbook.
Okay, so you're using it in your live session, right? Or live yes, Zoom?
That's a live class. That's a face-to-face class.
Okay. And then you then upload them into your course, right?
Yes, yeah. Now for my Zoom sessions, they know I'm going to review it, so they don't really look at it too much, I will tell you. So, they don't get that in the face-to-face. It's a little different. I can tell if they've done it or not, because they're with me. If not, I don't see that black screen. You know what I mean?
So. Okay. All right. Anybody else? How do you use it? So do you go and you use it in class? Certainly, when we have live class sessions, you can use it that way. But how do you use it? When you upload into your D2L course, what are some ways that you use it there?
I use it as a review. So just key points that I've gone over, or perhaps, second year students that need a little bit of refreshing from previous course materials. So in the program, so it's a program. So, maybe they need a refresher on whatever, maybe informed consent for, evaluation of clients. So I'll just do something real briefly, and I'll actually pull the same exact slides that I used in the previous semester. So.
Okay. Do you add the text right onto the slide for the student so they can work with it independently?
No, I don't. So I want to kind of force them to listen to this voice, which is painful, I know, but I want them to, it's more for just bullet points and talking points. So, and maybe I'll add a screenshot of some sort in there that this is what I'm talking about, have something circled or highlighted.
Okay. All right. Anybody else want to add? We have enough time for one more person to add anything in there. So basically at this point we have it where we're using it in a live session where it's in class. We use it where we're adding some additional notes and we put it up inside the course, but it's still counting very much on us being kind of like the giver of information, right? Anybody use it in a different way? Anybody upload into their course expecting their students to use it as they read through the textbook? So it's a review for a test, or it's a review of content, but it sits up there. It's independent from us engaging with it.
I use it currently for quizzes. I'm not sure if I just got on, but I use it for quizzes. So it's more like a lab review.
Okay.
And I use it that way.
Okay, great. Okay. All right. Well, the idea that we're working with today is that taking that PowerPoint, or in our case, we're going to be using Google Slides because we can share them, but taking those from what are oftentimes provided if we use a textbook, which are very text-based, to being ones that have more of an experience about it. And so what we're doing is we're building another resource for within the course when we can't directly connect with the students. Okay, so we're actually using interactivity, the students clicking on stuff to actually build their engagement. Okay, so in our piece here, I want to start off by literally this giant disclaimer. Okay, so we are going in today talking about modifying slides that are provided to us oftentimes by our textbook developers. And so I want to make sure it's really clear. Can everybody see over here in the corner my little remember copyright person? Can you guys see the remember copyright? Okay, so that's my little reminder to remember copyright. Because one of the things about this is as we modify our PowerPoints and our resources that are provided by another resource, like your textbook provider, then we need to be very conscious of the idea of copyright. And, I think that most of us have probably taken a PowerPoint that received from our textbook provider and added content to it or modified the content to fit our instructions. So basically, we're changing it to match our class. They have a more of a general perspective. We're adding in their notes. We're changing slides. We're changing the text on them. We're adding things into that for our presentations to make them more poignant to our location, our school, or whatever our situation is. And one of the things that I want to bring to your attention is the idea that in many cases, they will make a direct statement right there in the PowerPoint that says you have the rights. And this comes from Pearson. So Pearson on their download site, they actually have this direct quote, okay? You have rights to view, print, expand, or otherwise work with the downloaded instructor resources. So, it's the idea that you have the rights to modify, but that is not a given. So one of the things that I'm trying to make
maybe with select resources, right, Al? Like
Yes.
It might not be a blanket statement for everything they've ever done. It's select resources that they've designated. These are ones that you can mess with, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I'm telling you things you probably already know, but I just want to make sure that I'm bringing them up here because we are talking about modifying something that is oftentimes given to us by someone else. And they do have copyright statements all over their documents oftentimes. So if you do ever have any questions about the copyright, you can always ask your textbook provider or talk directly to your librarian because they have got experience with working with the textbook providers. So I just want to make sure that I'm spending a little bit of time with bringing this up because it is something that's very critical as we're changing our delivery of these tools. Okay, so let's go and look at basically the idea behind this. Many times when we get PowerPoints or presentations, what we receive oftentimes is it's a PowerPoint deck that has got text in it that has it really is literally in a sense grabbing snapshots from our textbook and then adding them to slides. And they're designed to be support of what you have for your slides. It's designed to add maybe some further information or to organize the materials that you have from your textbook. However, and I probably don't have to do a show of hands here, but how many times do we think that the students actually go and read religiously through these lovely PowerPoints that exist on there that are very text heavy oftentimes, or maybe have a graphic or two. But the idea with it is the information is primarily conveyed via a text that is designed to present content as content's sake, but not so much as a way that would directly appeal to a student. So I don't know about you, but I can figure that, at one time I was a clown, well, still probably am one, but a clown professionally. And I actually used to do story time. And so part of story time was that I would go, and in Pennsylvania, we have a ski place called Shawnee, and there you would get a spot and you would tell a story. And I would have these stories that I would know the beginning and I know where the content goes, but the story would bend very much depending on the audience that I had. Okay. So just like you're taking your PowerPoints and you're taking and tweaking them and modifying them to fit your story of your students, but what if when they go and they get your PowerPoint, you're not there to guide them? So many times, you're putting up your PowerPoints inside of your course. Many times it's like, just go and review the PowerPoint for the content. And in that case, the students are actually accessing it independent of you. Okay. So one of the things we can do is look at our PowerPoints, and in many cases it fits really nicely. Sometimes we have to think a little bit about it, but think about them as a story. Kids like stories, but so does everybody else. And it's actually, there's psychology behind the idea of how the brain actually remembers and makes connections to stories different than they do that pure literal text. Okay, so they paint a picture. So one of the things that we can do as part of our thing is to look for the story in our PowerPoint. I actually have an example here from an OTA, an occupational therapy course. And so what we have here is this on the left-hand side is actually the text that would have originally come from the PowerPoint, okay? And this would have been put inside the course, and the students would have used it as a support material for their course. But the idea is that I want to actually have them engage with the materials, not just be able to recall it. So the idea with this was to shift to something that makes it much more like an interactive story. And so I worked with Nancy Broadhurst, who's down there with the stone background. And so this is with Nancy's course. And what we tried to do was, if we were going to take and have it create an experience for the learner, how would we do that? And so we started off with the basic framework of the slides, and then we shifted over to making it much more like a story. And I'm going to show you parts of that because it's going to illustrate the parts that I wanted to bring up today in the idea of finding the narrative. Okay. All right, so I'm going to click on this thing, and here is actually the scene. That's the opening scene of the PowerPoint, and actually of the Google slide. And what we did is we built this inside of Google Slides, and what we're doing is trying to create it very much like the experience that a student would have as a new occupational therapist, okay? Or in the case of, if I'm doing one that's an entrepreneurship, I might have someone that literally is talking to the students about entrepreneurship, okay? So instead of them just reading a definition, they're actually able to listen to and to read through an engagement part of the thing. And so I'm going to put this in present mode here. So inside of here, we have Nancy. This is Nancy. So if you have a little click on slide.
Hello, it's nice to
I don't know if you guys can hear that.
I understand
Is that coming through?
you are an occupational therapy
So
student.
basically with this
studying
is
the areas
Nancy
of
is actually
occupation.
introducing them
My
to
name
the,
is Ms.
there we go. So basically what she was doing was introducing them to the materials. So just like when you get your PowerPoints, you actually start off with that text. Carol, you were mentioning about the idea that you add these enrichment components to it. But one of the things you could do is actually, if you make it like a story, you can actually tell them where it fits in the overall context by adding in there just literally some narration to it and actually doing it like a little story. And that's what we have here. So what we've done is we took the idea of them going through a case, and then they would have read this from the text side and actually start to make it look like a case file. So all of these different things here, these images were just images that were off of open educational sites, but the components here are literally just from a regular PowerPoint slide. So bent over a piece of paper, that kind of stuff like that. But the idea was that we wanted to paint a story. We wanted the students to feel like they were in a story rather than just reading text. And so as the learner goes through this material, they're still getting to the same outcomes that we wanted them to get to with the PowerPoint. But what they're doing is they're getting it in a story format, and they're also seeing the ideas that are in here that are that help them remember. Okay, so they have a picture of Connie. So this is a case of Connie, and they're reviewing a case of Connie. So this is called the interactive case of Connie. And so we have Connie that's over here on the side. We gave a little bit of information. We have the audio of this piece so they can listen to it. And then we have some characters over here that kind of illustrate the story. And then what we're doing with this is interactive. So what I've done is we just add a button onto this. We created a shape and we made it a link to a slide. Okay, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. So the idea that when you click on that next, the next piece it comes into, it asks you a question. And one of the things that came up in the PowerPoint was the idea that it said, when you're doing interactive activities, it's the idea of it's important to figure out where is the stage of life for this person, because that very much determines the kind of therapy that you give them. Now, we could actually have that as the long part of the PowerPoint, but what we're doing here is we're making it part of the story. So we're still getting to that same outcome, that same objective, but they're going to pull it out of the story, okay? And so in this case, we have three choices here. So the question appears at the top. They have the three choices, And if they click on a choice, then it gives them immediate feedback. So one of the things about this is it's as they're going in, they're learning and testing out what they're learning. What they're doing is it's not like they're going through a PowerPoint and without receiving any feedback about the decisions they make. So if they don't quite understand something, are they going and clicking on it and then still remaining confused possibly for the rest of the PowerPoint? Or do we have these little check-ins that basically we have it where the learner can get feedback on the answers they choose? Okay, so here in this case, they click on it and then it comes up as the answer displayed on the screen. Okay, and one of the things that was also important to Nancy was, since they're reviewing a case here, we want to make sure that they know where that information is coming from. So I don't know if you've ever had this situation where students are reading through a document and they're supposed to be reading for details and they kind of skim or they miss key big items. So what we're doing here is trying to make it so that we can tie in the idea of, okay, if we're going to give information, where do we get that information from? Okay, and so this actually goes through the entire thing. They get asked a series of questions, but all of these things are related to objectives that are part of that presentation. Okay, and then we give them answers throughout the piece. All right, so basically, this is the idea of moving something to a standard PowerPoint into the idea of a story. And at that point, it's not the original PowerPoint that the textbook provider delivered, but what we do is we use that as our jumping off point for creating our story about something in particular. And this could work for all different topics, not just something with necessarily a social science, or this is, like I said, this is occupational therapy. So this is the idea of reading cases. So you could use it for nursing or any number of different areas. So I'm going to leave this and go back to my basic presentation again. All righty. So here we were talking about the idea of finding the story. And so one of the things that you saw there in our presentation was the idea that we added these checkpoints in. So we added the idea that whenever we found the objectives that we wanted to use, we added in their questions in the slides themselves. Okay. And so many times when you have your PowerPoint deck up there and the students are working on it independent of you, they're going through the PowerPoint deck, but are they actually checking that they actually understand what it is, or are they just literally just kind of skimming down through it? Okay, and so we actually have this idea of adding checkpoints, and so I've used Nancy's example here. I'm going to use another example that is actually one that we used for gathering good sources or selecting good sources. And this was for the library, but it's actually been used in a lot of different courses. So this is actually Shakespeare and his idea of a story. Okay, and so I'm going to click through this next part. So here's the Shakespeare story that you have, and this is really just a basic idea of just pulling some images together, but it highlights the various components of the Google slide concept, or the idea of creating these interactive slides. Okay, so we have the basic story here, but everything we do, if we have got a question, we make sure we add in there some sort of feedback. And then to add a little bit of fun to it, we're also taking and adding a little changes to the images so the students are actually motivated to go through it. So instead of it just feeling like I'm clicking from slide to slide, I'm actually getting a little motivation as I go through. And so I'm going to show you, just give you a quick show of this example. Okay, so this is literally just taking, and I used a regular royalty-free image of Shakespeare, and then literally add just text to the slide. This all came from the objectives that were part of a standard presentation. And what we did is we pulled it out and figured out, okay, what is the story for it? Okay. Now, one of the things that is important for you to add when you're building this is to make sure that you add a direction slide. So if the students are going to do something where they're engaging independently, you want to make sure that you have some way of letting them know how to interact with it. If not, what they're going to be doing for their interactions is literally just clicking and not knowing what to do next. Because many times they look at these and they think of them just as PowerPoints. And think about it this way, it's not a PowerPoint anymore. It's like a slideshow that you're flipping through, okay? And you can jump anywhere inside the slideshow. You don't have to just jump to the next slide, okay? So in our case here, I'm going to go into presentation mode. So if I go into this and I'm clicking actually on these slides, and so here, part of it is, so can the student take a look at this resource and then determine whether or not they should use it or shouldn't use it, okay? And they've got 2 button choices here to use or not use. And so if you click on it, it gives you an answer, okay? Now, I'll give you a little secret with this. It doesn't matter what button they clicked on. It's going to always take them to this slide. Okay, so we give them feedback no matter what they do, whether they get it correct or incorrect, they're going to get corrective feedback. Because some students, they may think that they know the answer. They may make it an educated guess, but what we're doing is we're reinforcing their understanding at that point. So if I click on next and I choose this, it doesn't matter if I choose use or don't use. If I click on it, then I'm going to get a response back. And like I said, this is a do not, don't use, but then I also reinforce that information. So what I'm doing with this is making it so that I don't have to create a ton of extra slides. I'm just creating an extra slide for when I have a question and then I have an answer. So the idea with this is you could actually build a 2-slide template that you can just use over and over again and just modify the components on it. And that's what we did with Nancy's project. We actually just had, that was the same slide over and over again. All we did was modify the content that was on there. Okay. And so in this case, like I said, we're trying to reinforce ideas that are coming in there. But what we're doing is we're adding a little bit of the spice comes from thinking about the learner. Okay. Think about the age of our learners, thinking about what may make them smile, what may make them laugh. And the idea of adding that into this story. And literally, this is such a basic approach to literally just modifying the graphics, adding little things. And all this stuff came from within Google Slides. It's also available inside of PowerPoint. However, we can't completely share PowerPoints through D2L to our students as interactives. We can share them with them as a PowerPoint, but this, as you notice, does not have any slides along the side, does not have the film strip. So they can only click on what I give them access to click on because we're using the show mode of the slides. And I know that I'm rocketing through because I wanted to make sure I got enough time for this. But does anybody have any questions as I'm transitioning back to the other screen? I see chat messages in there. Are there any questions from that?
Chat messages were talking about the audio clips being an excellent opportunity to add narration, and also the recognition that this is something new about Google Slides that maybe some people didn't know about.
Oh, okay.
The interactivity.
Yeah, so the idea that what we're doing with this is we're taking a basic slide. It's no different than any other slide. And what we're doing is we're making it so that objects are going to be clickable on it. That means that when the user gets to it, we put something on that represents a button, okay? And then they can click on it and then jump to a particular slide. Now, I know that the coffee talk that's coming up this Friday is going to also talk about Google Slides, and Jason is going to be describing many of the different components, very similar to what I'm talking about today. Mine is less about the tool and more about the ways of using the tool. Okay, so I'm talking about Google Slides as the method we're using, but Jason's going to go into really, like how do you build these things? Okay, I'm going to spend a little time with it today, but that's what the coffee talk is. So that's my pitch for the coffee talk on Friday to go to that, because like I said, he's going to go into detail. He's going to talk about various components that you can do with this. Okay, but mine is more about the idea of thinking about how do you take your presentation and move it from one where it is just a text focus to be one where it's part of a story. I'm moving through it and I'm getting engagement or getting a smile as I go through the various components. Okay, so this one was the idea of Shakespeare. Alrighty, so basically this was the idea of adding in that corrective feedback, and that is really essential, especially if we're going to have our students do this independently. The idea with it is that we can put these inside of a course, and then the students can actually go and click on it without having to, have us there, okay? Because this is doing part of the teaching. This is, and one of the things that's different about this is it's different than a video. So, when you've created, so many of you created YouTube videos and created videos on your content, as you presented your content, I don't know about you, but I know that I am fully guilty of this. Sometimes I've clicked on a video and I kept on doing my email and all those other kinds of things. So the video was playing. Maybe I was learning through osmosis, but the idea that I wasn't truly engaged with it. In the case of these, because it requires a student to interact with the screen, they can't just passively go and just watch this. They need to make decisions, and each decision gives them more information, gives them consequence for that, that component. I'm going to move on to the next piece of this. So the idea that we have here is, let's do a really basic one that we're gonna change, and we're gonna focus really on a little bit of the story, but also adding in these interactive components. Okay. All right. So I right now have got a PowerPoint, oftentimes like we receive from our textbook providers, and it's got content in it. Okay, Nancy very, very nicely provided this to me. So this is where the starting point of that one that you saw of the case of Connie. Okay, so very much where we're presenting information, very much nice for a PowerPoint that we put and deliver on screen. But many times when we go and we put these up online for the students to use after the class or after we teach them something, they have the material. Hopefully they've taken notes from what you said in class. But if they've not, then they have just this text. So we can actually start to move this from the idea of the text that's here to the idea of making it into an interactive element. Okay. So I started off with this slide. And one of the things that I wanted to bring in my little icon up here, I think copyright. So if you're going to import this into Google Slides, and you guys all know this, if you're going to use the text exactly as it is, we've got to make sure we cite those. So I've got my little site reference down here at the bottom. So I make sure that they know that this material came directly from that. But if you're modifying it, if you're changing it to match a story model, then it becomes your own design, your own ideas behind it, and you've got more flexibility with that. Okay. So as you change this from a list of links or a list of bullet points into a story, it makes it much more active. Okay. So
one comment about that, Al, real quick too,
yes,
is remember, as instructors, we teach our students changing one word is not a modification, right? So we do want to make sure that we're consistent with that also when we're thinking about copyright.
Thank you. And that's key with this. I mean, basically, we are taking and using some elements of the original slide deck. So you're not starting from scratch all the time. You can use from the original slide deck. So here I have this slide deck that is the content. Okay. And I can actually leave it here just as the content they would get. I can tell them to get the information from the textbook, or just like we did with the beginning of Nancy's, we can actually add an audio file in here that adds in the lecture over top. Okay. And so we have a piece of content here. They may go for several screens of gathering information. And then we get to a point where we go, okay, I need to check and make sure that they truly understand what activity analysis is. So I'm taking that actual slide that I just had, and what I'm doing is I'm actually making a question out of it. Okay. I oftentimes will use a quiz that I have for content. And I'll make that quiz actually part of the components, and I'll pull in those quiz questions. But here I'm going to use just what's inside the PowerPoint. I know that what I want to test them on is the idea is what is activity analysis. So I'm literally taking the information that I gathered and that I want them to get, and I start to make something that they can click on. Okay. Now, one of the things about this is if I would have taken these words exactly and put them in there, okay, I'm doing that, then I need to cite it, of course, because I'm using the exact wording. But if I'm using wording that is more in context to a story, then I've got the flexibility, okay? But what I'm doing is I'm creating buttons that the students make a decision about that question, okay? And so I'm going to make this, I've just added a couple in here, and I'm going to strip out this text behind it because I don't need that anymore. I want to make it so that they're in the story. Okay. And now I've got these different things. So here is what is activity analysis. Now I do need to add a little bit of information. I'm going to add in there some directions. So click on the answer that you think is correct. Okay. Notice that I haven't gone and created a bunch of slides or anything like that. I literally just duplicated one of the slides I already had inside the deck. So this is not hopefully is not a big time adder to your information, okay? But I have my choices here, all right? Now, the thing that we did with Shakespeare is that I had it that no matter what they clicked on here, it always gave them feedback, okay? So how I can literally do that is duplicate that exact same slide if I wanted to, okay? So now I got that same slide in there. And no matter what they choose out of the three here, I'm going to give them feedback. Now, I like to use a little bubble or something like that so it stands out separate from the slide. And so I'm just going to go up here to my insert, and I'm doing this in PowerPoint, but you could very much do this inside of Google Slides. They literally are the same kind of view. The advantage of Google Slides is the sharing. And I'm going to actually leave that sharing part to Jason because he's going to talk about the idea of how to use the preview mode in. So there, once again, it's feeding everybody to that session on Friday. But so I have the components here, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in here just so I know and the students know that this is the answer slide. So this is the answer, and then I'm going to get rid of this click, okay, and then I'm going to put in there a little bubble, okay. So I'm going to insert a shape real quick, okay, and I like my little conversational ones, so it feels like I'm talking to them, okay, and I will use. How many people here, with a quick show of hands, are Bitmoji people? People use Bitmojis in their presentations? Oh, I can see some Bitmoji faces. Does everybody know what a Bitmoji is? If you do, okay, great. So you can create Bitmojis. The idea of what it does is it makes it so that it's more personalized. It's not like they're just reading from the text. So for me, if I went and I'm going to grab, so here's the end of Nancy's presentation, okay, where Nancy goes and thanks them for the great job they did. I'm going to, hopefully this will work out the way I want it to. So I'm going to add in there Nancy, okay? And so Nancy is now, she's just not there as a character, but she's giving you feedback on it. So the idea is that, I'm going to write in there, it is a dance move, of course. So activity analysis is a dance move. Okay, it's really not a dance move. Okay, but what I'm doing is I'm actually giving the students feedback on this. And so I could actually make it where I have, and I'm going to change the color of this so it stands out. So it stands out. Okay, so I have there, I'll move it over here. I'm going to have Nancy give them feedback on it, but I want to make sure that it's a corrective feedback. So I'm not just telling them that it's a dance move, or I'm not just telling them it's correct. I'm actually giving them the answer or the information based on what it is. Okay, so I can say, here it is, 2 different activities. And I would use this a little bit more in the text format. Okay, and I'm going to put in there the information. So it's not just that they're getting the answer that they got it right or wrong, but they're getting that corrective feedback. That is the part that is so important about this, is the idea that because they're doing it independently, they need to be able to get feedback on the decisions they make. Okay, and they're learning from those decisions. They're learning either from their original choice, which may have been successful, or from the feedback that you're giving them. All right, so I have got the instruction that was here. I've got my question slide, and now I'm going to make it so that when you click on any of these slides, it jumps over to the next screen. So I'm going to click on a shape, and I'm on a Mac, but you can do this on a Windows machine. I'm going to click on it, and then most of these actually have a thing of adding a link, but actually, if I'm going to make this kind of more like a Google slide, if I go up to the top, and if I go to the home, I'm so much better at Google Slides now. Now that I've been doing this so much, I'm so much better at Google Slides. Okay, so I go up to where I have my link, and it's going to say, where do you want to link to? Well, I'm going to link to this document, and I'm not going to just link to the next page. I'm actually going to link to a particular slide. So that's actually slide 5. So now, if they click on this answer, it will jump them to this slide. Okay, and I can make it so that anything, like I said, like we did with Shakespeare, that anything they click on will take them to that slide. Or I can make it so that there's a correct answer and an incorrect answer. So in that case, I take what I have for my answer slide and I duplicate it. And now I just make a different one that is going to be the corrective one. Okay, so this one might be the correct answer. Okay. And then I give them different information for that. But basically the idea behind this is we're starting to move this away from where it's the text that's part of it to now making it where it's much more interactive. They're engaged in the process. We're taking our PowerPoints, oftentimes provided by the textbook provider or ones that we've created, and we're adding in those pieces that are not just an image on the screen, but something where they can use it independent of their learning with you in class. It's inside the course. They can use it as a refresher of their memory. They can use it as a refresher of their ideas. And we can also have them check their knowledge as they go. So this is basically about using interactive slides or creating interactive slides. And although the focus was Google Slides, and that's an easy way to create them and share them, you could create it actually in PowerPoint and then upload inside of Google Slides as well. But what kind of questions do you have about creating these?
Not necessarily a question, but I think it's going to be super useful for me, I know, and how I want to transition a little bit more into hybrid rather than so much, on campus face to face. So I'll be working hard.
It's an ideal opportunity for that connection between class sessions too. So you can present something in class, take your exact same PowerPoint that you used in class, and then just add those interactive slides in between it. And that's an opportunity for them to check their knowledge. It's not going to the grade book or anything like that, but it's a good formative assessment. So they're able to get feedback on their decisions and really kind of reaffirm that they understand or correct misunderstandings.
Hi, this is Tamika. I have a quick question. It's not necessarily about how to add stuff in, but is there a working session with CCIT that, I know it's like the presentation part, but there like another session, or we sign up to work on some of these things with you?
One of the things that I do, I teach a G25 class where we actually build these. We build interactives in that G25 class. And IDT G25. And we build these in that class. And so we actually have at the end of that is a showcase where everybody shows their work. And by the way, I'm showing you a very simplified version here, but you could take that story like we did with Nancy and really run with it. So I see that Calvin's on the session with us, and we're going to do something very similar to that. We're going to do decision-based for leadership. So the idea that they're going to make decisions, and instead of it being a straight story where you go from screen to screen, each decision you make actually jumps you to a different portion of the presentation that would be based on that decision. So if you decide to fire the employee, okay, what are the consequences that happen with that? Or you decide to just reprimand the student or the person, what happens if you make that decision? So as you go through this, you're going to be making different decisions, and there's going to be consequences, not immediate consequences, but maybe 3 steps down the road. But that's a little bit more of the advanced kind of thinking. And usually we have something that's called an Ilo request, which is an interactive learning object request. And you can put in that request right on the CCIT webpage. You can put that request, and we can, what we do is we set up times to meet with you. We have, we build these things off of ThingLink. We can build them any number of different ways, but that's one way that you initiate your request, and then we figure out where we can fit into for the schedule, because you worked directly with a CCIT person while you're building that.
Albert, I had a suggestion that maybe you make an interactive PowerPoint that shows us how to make an interactive PowerPoint.
I actually
and distribute that easily without doing you could take it whenever you feel like it, rather than going into a live session or something.
Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah,
like a space thingy.
We actually have, Jason has created a interactive component as part of an MCC that is dealing with presentation or interactive presentation components. I think he's going to probably mention that on Friday, maybe. But if not, I will take and post a little link out to everybody. I think we got everybody's names here. I'll send a link out to everybody. And Calvin, if we need to create something that's got a little more action in it, That sounds good to me. I love doing these things. The hardest part for this though is figuring out the story. It's the idea that you have to put on your filmmaker's hat as you go and you design these. All righty. Well, thank you everybody for joining me today. If you do have questions or ideas that you want to bounce off of me or bounce off of anybody from the CCIT, please just send me an email and I'm happy to work with you. And we can kind of build it out. I know Calvin's project started off small and it's kind of gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And by the time we're done, it'll have this whole full interactive experience about it. So it started off with just literally trying to present content. So thank you very much, everybody.